highest seat for nearly 200 years, and they want in. Ed O'Keefe spoke with the leaders of Cherokee Nation.
All that we need to do is for the House to seat me.
They were removed, silenced, and nearly erased, but they didn't disappear. The Cherokee are now running billion-dollar economies, enforcing their own laws, and reviving ancient ceremonies once banned by force. A Supreme Court ruling just gave them back control of huge parts of Oklahoma. And thanks to Joe Rogan's podcast, millions are finally asking what really happened on the Trail of Tears, and what's happening now that no one's talking about. The truth will leave you speechless. Let's discover, who are the Cherokee? They didn't vanish. They didn't fold. The Cherokee were removed from their land, stripped of their rights, and nearly silenced. But they didn't disappear. Today, they're one of the most powerful and organized Native nations in the world, running billion-dollar economies, their own justice systems, and public health infrastructure. But how did we get from a trail of death to a nation reborn? Who really were the Cherokee before the world knew their name? And what did Joe Rogan recently uncover on his podcast that's got historians completely rethinking the story? The Cherokee are one of the oldest and most sophisticated Native American nations, with roots that go back over 1,000 years. Before the United States was even a thought, the Cherokee had already built villages, political systems, and spiritual traditions across what is now the southeastern United States, in particular, Georgia, Tennessee, North and South Carolina. These weren't scattered nomadic groups. The Cherokee were settled, structured, and expansive. At their height, they had a population in the tens of thousands and governed hundreds of towns, each with its own local leadership, connected by roads and trails that stretched across river valleys and mountain ranges. These weren't tribes in the woods. They were a nation with law, language, agriculture, and diplomacy. At the center of Cherokee society was the clan system, which was as much about social rules as it was about identity. There were 7 clans: Wolf, Deer, Bird, Longhair, Wild Potato, Blue, and Paint. Membership wasn't a personal choice. It was inherited through your mother, and it governed how you lived, who you could marry, and what responsibilities you carried. You weren't just from a clan, you belonged to it. Each clan had specific roles within the community and was expected to look after its members in matters ranging from economics to justice to spiritual rights. Importantly, clan intermarriage was strictly forbidden. You couldn't marry someone from your own clan. It was considered both a spiritual offense and a social risk, designed to maintain genetic diversity and community stability. This system, though ancient, feels oddly modern in how it distributed responsibility and kept people accountable to one another. And while most people assume Native leadership was informal or autocratic, Cherokee governance was actually balanced and highly democratic. They operated under a dual chief system, one for peace and one for war. The peace chief, often called the White Chief, handled diplomacy, law, trade, and internal harmony. The war chief, or Red Chief, led military efforts and was only activated during times of external threat. These weren't just ceremonial titles. They reflected a belief in specialized leadership suited to the moment. Alongside these chiefs was a council of elders and representatives from each clan, ensuring that no single group could dominate. Decisions were debated, discussed, and made with the long-term survival of the nation in mind. The system valued wisdom, consensus, and adaptability, traits often overlooked in mainstream accounts of indigenous history. Cherokee society also gave women far more authority than European society at the time. One powerful position was that of the beloved woman, or gigao. Women who had shown extraordinary leadership, bravery, or service were given a seat at the council table, the right to speak on national matters, and even the power to pardon prisoners. Nancy Ward, perhaps the most famous beloved woman, helped broker peace with colonial leaders and pushed for diplomacy in times of rising tension. Cherokee gender roles were complementary, not hierarchical. Power wasn't monopolized by men. It was shared where it made sense. And if you think their brilliance stopped at politics and social design, think again. The Cherokee were innovators. Sequoyah, a silversmith and veteran of the War of 1812, did something no one else in Native America had done. He created a written language for his people, not a copy of English or Latin, a full syllabary, 85 characters representing the sounds of the Cherokee language. It didn't take long for his system to be adopted across the nation. Within years, literacy soared. Cherokee newspapers, laws, and educational materials began circulating through the mountains. While European settlers still struggled with local governance, the Cherokee were printing their own constitution. So when Joe Rogan brought up the Cherokee on his podcast, what he didn't mention, but probably should have, is that the Cherokee weren't just warriors. They were architects of society. They had already solved many of the problems modern governments still struggle with, like distributing power, preserving culture, and maintaining public health, centuries before America was born. Why don't more people know this? Why is this legacy buried beneath stories of removal and defeat? And why are some of the most shocking truths about the Cherokee only now being uncovered by historians and podcasters alike? Because maybe the Cherokee didn't just survive history, they outsmarted it. Tribal justice and what schools didn't teach you. Something massive just happened, and barely anyone's talking about it. In a groundbreaking discovery that Joe Rogan himself recently hinted at during a podcast, the U.S. Supreme Court confirmed that nearly half the land in eastern Oklahoma is still legally indigenous territory. The case, McGirt v. Oklahoma, decided in the summer of 2020, didn't just affect one man's sentence. It cracked open a legal door that had been slammed shut for over a century. The ruling confirmed that treaties made with the Muscogee Creek Nation were never legally dissolved, and by extension, it affirmed the same for the Cherokee Nation and others. Tribal land was never ceded. It was only ignored. So what does this mean? In short, tribal sovereignty is back, and it's real. The Cherokee Nation has since used this ruling to rebuild a criminal justice system on its own terms. They've filed more than 25,000 criminal cases in just a few years, hired over 70 marshals to enforce tribal law, and invested more than $74 million into public safety. For context, that's more than many mid-sized cities in the U.S. spend on law enforcement each year. This isn't symbolic progress. It's real jurisdiction, real policing, and real courts, run by the Cherokee Nation itself. But justice isn't the only area where the Cherokee are leading. Their economic footprint is enormous. The Cherokee Nation currently contributes more than $3.1 billion annually to Oklahoma's economy. That's not a typo. Through a network of tribally owned businesses, including casinos, healthcare facilities, construction firms, and even a film office, the Cherokee Nation employs over 23,000 people. They're not just hiring tribal citizens. These are jobs for everyday Oklahomans in industries ranging from hospitality to engineering. The idea that native nations are economically dependent is now completely outdated. In many regions, they're the backbone of the economy. So the question becomes, how did we get from forced removal and cultural erasure to billion-dollar economic power and independent policing? The answer is complicated, and it begins with one of the darkest chapters in American history, the Trail of Tears. In 1830, under President Andrew Jackson, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. The law gave the federal government the authority to negotiate voluntary removal treaties with native nations in the southeastern United States. But for the Cherokee, there was nothing voluntary about it. Despite having adopted many aspects of European American governance, including a constitution, a bicameral legislature, a written language, and even plantations, white settlers and state governments in the South wanted their land. The tipping point came with the discovery of gold in Georgia. In 1835, a small faction of Cherokee leaders, without the consent of the majority, signed the Treaty of New Echota, ceding all Cherokee land east of the Mississippi River in exchange for land in what is now Oklahoma. The treaty was not approved by the Cherokee National Council and was widely denounced by the tribe's principal chief, John Ross. Still, the U.S. Senate ratified it. What followed was one of the most brutal acts of forced migration in American history. Beginning in 1838, U.S. troops rounded up more than 16,000 Cherokee and forced them to march over 1,000 miles westward. Along the way, over 4,000 Cherokee died of disease, starvation, and exposure. Entire families were lost. Elders collapsed in the snow. Children were buried in unmarked graves along muddy trails. And for what? Land the government had already decided to take, treaty, or not. But here's the part no one tells you in school. The Trail of Tears wasn't the end. It was a beginning. What emerged from that devastation was what many Cherokee now call the Second Birth. In Indian Territory, they reestablished their government. They built schools. They started businesses. They passed laws and held elections. They didn't forget what happened, but they refused to let it be the final word. Yet even in Oklahoma, the fight for survival continued. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the federal government launched a new strategy: cultural erasure. This time, the tools weren't guns and forced marches. They were boarding schools, church missions, and bureaucratic paperwork. Children were taken from their families and sent to government or church-run schools where they were punished for speaking their language, wearing traditional clothing, or practicing their customs. Hair was cut. Native names were replaced with English ones. In some cases, abuse was rampant. The goal wasn't education, it was assimilation. The damage was deep and psychological. Generations grew up disconnected from their language, history, and even their sense of self. And yet, even here, the Cherokee adapted. Some families passed down traditions in secret. Others fought in court to maintain tribal land and governance. By the late 20th century, Cherokee leaders began reclaiming what was taken, reopening language immersion schools, building cultural centers, and teaching a new generation what the boarding schools tried to erase. But internal conflict wasn't only coming from outside. During the U.S. Civil War, the Cherokee Nation was deeply divided. Some Cherokee aligned with the Confederacy, hoping that support would protect their sovereignty from an increasingly hostile federal government. Others joined the Union, believing it was the best chance at long-term survival. The result was a bitter internal war within the nation itself. Families were split. Alliances shattered. Even after the war ended, the fractures remained. Political factions emerged. Trust eroded. It took decades to rebuild a unified government, and the scars from that divide still shape tribal politics today. All of this, the legal victories, the economic powerhouse, the cultural renewal, might sound like a surprise, but not if you've been paying attention to the ripple effects of certain cultural voices. Enter Joe Rogan. In episode number 1397 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Rogan interviewed S.C. Gwynn, author of Empire of the Summer Moon, a book about the rise and fall of the Comanche Nation. During the interview, Rogan called the book so sad and so gripping and so riveting and went on to praise its brutal honesty in depicting the violence and complexity of native and settler conflict. The Comanche, he noted, were not passive victims. They were strategic, powerful, and terrifyingly effective warriors. His audience, numbering in the hundreds of thousands per episode, heard something they rarely hear: that Native history is intense, layered, and filled with people who shaped the outcome of America just as much as the Founding Fathers. What's fascinating is that this seemingly offhand praise triggered something. People began searching for more. Book sales spiked. Online forums filled with threads about Native nations, their political systems, their military tactics, their contributions. And while Gwynn's book focuses on the Comanche, the effect spread. Listeners started discovering the Cherokee, the Iroquois, the Lakota. They began asking, why weren't we taught this in school? Rogan didn't frame his conversation as political. He didn't bash the government or push a specific agenda. What he did was even more powerful. He got people to care. For many of his listeners, especially those who wouldn't usually seek out Indigenous history, this was a gateway moment. And once that door opens, it's hard to close again. Reinvention, resistance, and reality today. Most people think of the Cherokee as one single group, one nation, one government, one story, but that's not the case. In reality, there are 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes in the United States today, and each took a very different path after the violent removals of the 19th century. There's the Cherokee Nation, based in Oklahoma, which is the largest. Then there's the United Keetoowah Band, also based in Oklahoma but with separate leadership, membership criteria, and history. And finally, there's the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, who live in North Carolina. They're the descendants of those who managed to stay, some by hiding in the mountains, some by resisting removal outright, and others by negotiating special land holdings. These groups aren't divided by blood, but by geography, politics, and survival strategy. What unites them is identity and the ongoing work of protecting it. It's tempting to think of the Trail of Tears as the moment when everything ended. But for these 3 Cherokee nations, it was just the beginning of divergence. The Cherokee Nation and the United Keetoowah Band were both shaped by forced relocation to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. There, they re-established governments, schools, and economies under intense pressure to assimilate and disappear. The Eastern Band, meanwhile, held tight to the Appalachian lands they'd always known, navigating a different set of political struggles in the American South. Today, all 3 tribes are recognized by the federal government and operate with their own systems of leadership, citizenship rules, and tribal infrastructure. That's important because while the public sees the Cherokee as a monolith, each of these groups has faced distinct legal, cultural, and economic battles. But there is one legal turning point that affected all of them, even if indirectly, and that's McGirt versus Oklahoma. This Supreme Court decision in 2020 ruled that a large portion of eastern Oklahoma remains Indian land because Congress never officially dissolved the reservations through legislation. In legal terms, this reinforced the idea of tribal sovereignty, meaning that federally recognized tribes retain the right to govern their own lands and people, enforce their own laws, and prosecute crimes that occur on their territory. For the Cherokee Nation, it was a seismic shift. It validated what they'd argued for decades, that they are not just a cultural group, they are a political nation with legal rights the federal government is obligated to respect. Since then, the Cherokee Nation has moved quickly to enforce that ruling. They've expanded their judicial system, built new courts, and added more marshals to enforce Cherokee law on Cherokee land. Over 25,000 cases have been prosecuted under tribal authority since the McGirt ruling, ranging from theft and assault to domestic violence and substance offenses. These aren't show trials or PR moves. They're real legal proceedings, handled by tribal judges under tribal codes, with serious consequences for those convicted. This also means that many Cherokee citizens, who previously would have gone through Oklahoma's state courts, now have their cases heard in systems built by their own people. It's one of the most significant expansions of tribal jurisdiction in modern U.S. history. Of course, this kind of sovereignty doesn't come without tension. Oklahoma state officials have pushed back hard, claiming that the ruling creates confusion or weakens law enforcement. But the Cherokee response has been consistent. This isn't about weakening the law. It's about enforcing it with the proper authority. While Joe Rogan praises Native toughness in theory, often admiring the grit and brutality of historical warriors like the Comanche, few realize the kind of legal warfare the Cherokee are still fighting today. The battleground isn't open plains anymore. It's courtrooms, budgets, and legislation. But law and governance are just one part of what makes the Cherokees so powerful today. Their economic reach is just as striking. The Cherokee Nation contributes over $3.1 billion to Oklahoma's economy every year. That figure includes revenue from tribally owned casinos, but also from a wide array of other industries: construction firms, hospitality companies, aerospace manufacturing, and even tech services. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of scaled, strategic growth. Healthcare is one area where this investment is easy to see. The Cherokee Nation recently broke ground on a $255 million medical center in Claremore, Oklahoma. When completed, it will serve tens of thousands of patients annually, including both native and non-native residents. The facility will include emergency care, specialty clinics, outpatient services, and mental health support, addressing a major need in a region often underserved by state systems. The fact that a tribal government is filling gaps left by state and federal institutions should make people pause. It raises a bigger question: who's really leading in these communities? Housing is another area where the Cherokee Nation is stepping in. Through the Housing, Jobs, and Sustainable Communities Act, the nation has funded major residential developments like the Warrior Addition, a cluster of storm-resistant, lease-to-own homes built specifically for Cherokee citizens. These aren't luxury projects. They're smart, long-term investments in stable neighborhoods, economic opportunity, and disaster resilience. And again, these developments often benefit the broader population too, creating jobs and improving infrastructure in rural Oklahoma towns. Then there's employment. The Cherokee Nation and its business arm, Cherokee Nation Businesses, support more than 23,000 jobs, many of them filled by non-native workers. These are not make-work positions or politically padded bureaucracies. They're competitive jobs in sectors that include construction, engineering, healthcare, administration, and even entertainment. One of the nation's latest moves has been to develop its own film commission, opening up Cherokee lands and talent to filmmakers looking for authentic indigenous settings and stories. This blending of economic growth with cultural preservation is intentional, and it's working. But maybe the most quietly revolutionary effort is happening in gardens, not boardrooms. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Cherokee Nation organized massive food distribution drives, reaching over 112,000 citizens with essential supplies. But rather than stop there, they started rethinking food security altogether. The result has been a full-scale push for food sovereignty, meaning the ability of Cherokee people to control how, where, and what they eat, based on cultural and ecological traditions. What we still don't understand: Most people have no idea that the Cherokee once enslaved African people, and even fewer know that the Cherokee Nation is now the only one of the so-called 5 civilized tribes to grant full tribal citizenship to the descendants of those formerly enslaved individuals, known today as the Freedmen. This isn't a comfortable subject, and that's exactly why it's so important. The Cherokee, like many other native nations in the southeastern United States, adopted certain aspects of European American society in the 18th and 19th centuries: agriculture, written laws, and, unfortunately, chattel slavery. By the time of the Civil War, thousands of black men, women, and children were held as property by Cherokee slaveholders. After emancipation, the U.S. government signed post-war treaties requiring these freedmen to be made full citizens of the Cherokee Nation. But, over the years, citizenship rights were narrowed, challenged, and, in many cases, revoked, leading to a long, bitter legal battle over who gets to belong. It wasn't until 2017 that the Cherokee Nation Supreme Court finally ruled that freedmen descendants have the same rights as Cherokee citizens by blood. This wasn't just a court decision. It was a reckoning, a confrontation with a chapter of Native history that had long been buried, overlooked, or dismissed. And it's a moment that still divides people inside and outside the tribe. On one hand, some argue that tribal nations should have the absolute right to determine their own citizenship, free from federal interference. That's what sovereignty means. On the other hand, critics argue that denying freedmen their rightful place in the nation is a continuation of anti-black racism and erasure. The tension between these two truths, indigenous sovereignty and racial justice, is complex and unresolved. But in an era of growing alliances between black and Native activists, this history matters more than ever. It shapes conversations about reparations, identity, and who gets to claim a history of dispossession. Another part of Cherokee society that's rarely understood, especially by outsiders, is how gender, identity, and spirituality have always operated outside rigid Western categories. While the term Two-Spirit wasn't historically used by the Cherokee, the concept it represents absolutely existed. In pre-colonial Cherokee society, individuals who embodied both masculine and feminine traits often held important ceremonial or communal roles. They weren't seen as outcasts or confused. They were seen as gifted. Some were healers. Some were advisors. Some were leaders in spiritual matters. Colonization didn't just take land. It imposed new ideas about gender and morality that tried to erase these roles altogether. Even today, many Cherokee people blend Christian beliefs with older spiritual practices. This syncretism isn't a contradiction, it's survival. For generations, ceremonies had to be conducted in secret, prayers hidden in Bible verses, and sacred spaces disguised as everyday ones. The Green Corn Festival, once suppressed by missionaries and government officials, continues today as a spiritual and social anchor. Its core themes, cleansing, forgiveness, renewal, have remained the same even as the outward form has adapted. This kind of spiritual blending often confuses outsiders looking for pure tradition, but the truth is more interesting. Cherokee spirituality has always been about adaptability, not purity. But there's one area where time is running out, and that's language. The Cherokee language is what linguists call polysynthetic, meaning it can pack multiple ideas, relationships, and nuances into a single word. It's structurally closer to classical languages like Latin or Sanskrit than to English, with a depth and flexibility that takes years to master. Joe Rogan often talks about his admiration for complex languages like Latin, how their grammar shapes thought and worldview. What he rarely acknowledges is that indigenous languages like Cherokee do the same thing and are vanishing far faster. As of now, there are only a few thousand fluent Cherokee speakers left, and the majority are over the age of 70. This is what linguists call a language emergency. If the youngest fluent speakers are elders, then in a few decades, unless serious efforts are made, the language will die. And with it goes an entire way of thinking, describing, joking, arguing, storytelling, and remembering. To counter this, the Cherokee Nation has invested in immersion schools where children are taught entirely in Cherokee, as well as language apps, family courses, and even street signage in both English and Cherokee. These aren't just education initiatives, they're acts of cultural survival. Because language isn't just communication. It's memory. It's resistance. It's the ability to see the world through a lens that's been shaped by centuries of place, story, and struggle. The danger is not just losing words, it's losing what those words carry. There are ideas in Cherokee, moral concepts, kinship structures, humor, even grief, that don't directly translate into English. That's why revitalization is about more than just saving a vocabulary list. It's about recovering a philosophy. Meanwhile, a parallel battle is playing out in the media. The Cherokee Nation was recently named the first film-ready reservation in the United States, meaning it now has the infrastructure, permissions, and support networks in place to host major film and television productions. This isn't just about economic development, it's about representation. For decades, Hollywood has treated Native people as one-dimensional stereotypes, either stoic warriors or mystical guides, rarely modern, rarely real. When Native characters do appear on screen, they're often played by non-Native actors or written by people with no understanding of tribal life. In some cases, celebrities have even claimed false Native ancestry to boost their personal brand, playing Indian as a form of cultural cosplay. That's why initiatives like CO from the Res, a new podcast launched by the Cherokee Nation, are so important. It features conversations with Cherokee artists, leaders, and culture keepers telling their own stories in their own voices. No filters, no romanticism, no outsiders speaking for them, just lived experience, shared directly. This kind of content might not go viral in the same way that a Hollywood drama or Joe Rogan episode does, but it builds something stronger. It creates space for authenticity, connection, and nuance. What the Cherokee teach us about power, memory, and survival. If there's one thing the Cherokee story makes clear, it's that power doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always wear a uniform or sit in a marble building. Sometimes it grows quietly, through language whispered from grandparent to child, through court rulings won after decades of legal battles, through seeds planted in home gardens using knowledge passed down over centuries. Cherokee survival wasn't just about holding on to what was left. It was about building something new, under pressure, under surveillance, and against the odds. The Cherokee Nation today operates not as a historical museum piece, but as a functioning sovereign government, with its own laws, courts, economy, and cultural programs. It prosecutes crimes, manages billion-dollar industries, educates its people, and invests in its land. It is a nation in every sense of the word. And yet, many Americans still don't realize that. They imagine native life as something that ended long ago. The Cherokee contradict that every day just by existing, working, governing, and planning for the next generation. But survival isn't the same as restoration. There are still painful gaps. Only a few thousand fluent speakers remain. Ceremonies like the Green Corn Festival continue, but often under threat of cultural dilution. There are constant legal skirmishes around land, jurisdiction, and federal authority. Even the recognition of freedmen descendants, something the Cherokee Nation has boldly committed to, remains a deeply controversial subject in Indian country. These challenges are not footnotes, they are front lines. So what do the Cherokee teach us really? They teach us that memory is a kind of resistance, that legal systems, when fought for, can bend, but only when people demand it. That sovereignty isn't an abstract legal term, but a lived daily negotiation of power, community, and identity. They show us that economic power and cultural strength are not mutually exclusive. And they remind us that stories, real ones, not Hollywood imitations, have the ability to reshape how a people are seen and how they see themselves. For viewers who first heard about the Cherokee through Joe Rogan's podcast or stumbled across these stories online, this is your invitation to go deeper. The headlines barely scratch the surface. The Cherokee Nation isn't a relic, it's a model. A model of how a people can adapt without erasing themselves, modernize without forgetting who they are, and lead without waiting for permission. That's not just indigenous strength. That's nationhood. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.